Zach, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm showing you how to create a HDR video file using a sequence of raw photos using LRTimelapse 6 and DaVinci Resolve Studio. This HDR video file is not to be confused with a sequence of HDR photos blended together. That is another concept entirely. This video talks about adding more colors to your video footage through wider color gamuts and color management in LRTimelapse 6 and using different brightness levels that you can't even look at on most monitors because you need specific hardware for this. This is pretty in-depth niche video, and I have been working for quite a while now on an entirely new chapter for my Ultimate Time-Lapse course that covers HDR videos for time-lapse photographers specifically. If you'd like to stay up to date with that, please subscribe to the Time Warper Weekly, which is the first place where you will get updates about this upcoming chapter. Now, before we begin, you're going to need a couple of things. Obviously, a HDR monitor to be able to display the levels of colors and brightnesses that we captured on scene on our camera sensor that then gets translated through software through the light that hits your eyeballs from the monitor. Not each monitor is ready for HDR. If you have one, I'm pretty sure you're aware that you would have one. But even in that world of HDR monitors, there's a huge difference in quality and levels. And yeah, I've listed all of the hardware and software that I use down below. They're affiliate links. You support my channel via clicking those links, blah, blah, blah. But up next, you'll also need a HDR monitor calibrator to calibrate your screen properly. Then you will need a LRTimelapse 6 license. You will also need Adobe Lightroom Classic to color grade your raw files, and you will also need DaVinci Resolve Studio to access all of the HDR tools that we'll be using at the end of this video. What I love about DaVinci Resolve or DaVinci Resolve Studio is the fact that it is an enormous amount of functionality bundled into one piece of software that you buy once for one price. I love that. Now, here's what you need to prepare for your HDR video file creation. You need that sequence of raw files. I'm going to be using this shot here, which was shot on my Lumix S1 in aperture priority mode with auto ISO and exposure leveling on, which pretty much gives me a super clean, holy grail day to night time lapse straight out of camera. I just add some contrast and vibrance and saturation, etc. in Adobe Lightroom, but the performance out of these Lumix cameras is pretty insane. I know some of the Sonys and the Nikons do that as well. Other brands have a lot to work on still. Once you've got your sequence captured, you need to calibrate your monitor. What our eyes see on set, what the light is, how that gets translated from the sensor to the raw information, how that gets sent to the color grading software that we'll be using, and how that gets sent to our eyes from the monitor. There are so many variables here, and you need to be on top of pretty much every single step of this process, which is why it's been taking me so long to create this new chapter, because it is an insane amount of variables and not a lot of people are actually sharing information about this, which is why I'm so excited to be making this video today. So, calibrate your monitor, be it with a built-in calibrator or an external calibrator, to make sure that you have a nice picture profile pretty much for your monitor that we're going to load into LRTimelapse later. We need this so that everything in all these different pieces of software is lined up properly and is displayed properly. You download the app that comes with your calibrator, you plug it in, you follow the steps, you calibrate it, and then you're pretty much done. Once your screen is calibrated, you want to open up Adobe Lightroom Classic as well as LRTimelapse 6, go to the settings in LRTimelapse 6, go to color management, turn it on, and select that monitor calibration profile that you've just created so that the software can color manage whatever is on screen. Restart LRTimelapse so that it's dialed in, then go to Adobe Lightroom. And honestly, this next step is going to go too fast for you. This video is about creating the HDR video files, not about how LRTimelapse and Lightroom Classic work together to make a holy grail sequence. If you want to learn how to do that, I've got plenty of videos about that up here or linked on my playlists. Once you're done color grading, return to Lightroom Classic, select all your photos, go to File, Export, and use the settings that you see on screen to create an intermediary sequence of 16-bit TIFF files. Why 16-bit TIFF files? Because we are working with RAW files. They can be up to 14 bits. If you go from a 14-bit RAW to an 8-bit JPEG to a HDR video file, you're losing data. You're going to create a fake HDR file, pretty much. We're going to go from 14-bit RAW to 16-bit TIFF to 12-bit HDR video. We're going to try and retain as much quality as possible That's the whole point of this workflow, is to not lose any of the data that we have originally captured on our sensor as a raw file. Once those TIFFs are exported, and this can take quite a while depending on your system and your software, you're going to open up DaVinci Resolve Studio and you're going to dial in some settings in your project settings. So go to File, Project Settings, and then Color Management. You want to set your color science to DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. Set your color processing mode to HDR Rec 2020 Intermediate. Then you want to check Use Separate Color Space and Gamma. One of these deals with the wider color gamuts that we've been working in. The other one deals with the higher brightness values. Set your output color space to Rec 2020 and Rec 2100 HLG or hybrid log gamma. Check HDR mastering is for 1000 nits and enable HDR 10+. So the color space we are using is Rec 2020, which is a wider color gamut space, which allows us to use more colors than what we're used to in standard dynamic range footage. The gamma we're using here, which deals with the brightness values, is Rec 2100 HLG or hybrid log gamma. This is a combination of a log curve and a gamma curve and allows us to put more brightness values in these files. Import your TIFF sequence into DaVinci Resolve. Make sure to set as a sequence, create a timeline out of that, add further color grading using the HDR color wheels, but make sure that every node in this process is set to HDR processing. And then once you're done with that, we can go to the Delivery tab. But before that, maybe you have a question. Why aren't we putting our raw files straight into DaVinci Resolve? Well, the first reason is not each camera brand is recognized properly in DaVinci Resolve. Those Lumix files that I often work with, they are not properly recognized in DaVinci Resolve yet. I'm hoping that they have full support for that soon, but for now, DaVinci Resolve, flying around, seems to work better with Canon files, for example. If anything, the colors are totally whack on these Lumix files, which is why I've turned them into TIFF files first. Secondly, if you want to ramp your white balance and exposures and all that in LRTimelapse, LRTimelapse is optimized for that kind of editing. Plus, deflickering in LRTimelapse is still absolutely beautiful. So you want to treat your raw files with LRTimelapse before turning them into TIFF files, before turning that into a HDR video file using DaVinci Resolve Studio. Now, up next, we want to export this HDR video clip. Once again, there are so many variables here, but use the following settings. Go to the Deliver workspace and set the format to QuickTime. Then select the DNxHR codec and select the DNxHR 444 12-bit type. Make sure you check constant bitrate and set your data levels of the video to full. Check force sizing to highest quality and check force debayer to highest quality as well. Hit go, let this run, and boom, you've got yourself a HDR video file. Now, I know that there's probably a lot of terms in this video that might be confusing, that you've never heard of before, like Rec 2020, Rec 2100, HLG. I haven't even talked about PQ transfer functions yet. There's so many terms in this whole HDR world that were unknown to me up until a few months ago, and I made it a point for myself. I want to educate myself. I want to know more about this. So I talked to a lot of people. I've done a lot of research, hours and hours and hours over weeks and months. Now my scripts are ready. I just have to sit down and film it and edit all these videos. I'm hoping by mid to late Jan, that this upcoming chapter will be part of the Ultimate Time-Lapse course. If you remember already, you will get free access. If you're not a member yet, have a think. It's a pretty valuable course with by then probably about 100 videos in it. If you have any questions, drop them down below and I'll try to reply where I can. Hope you make some nice HDR videos from now on. And that's all I got for you today. May the clouds forever be in your favor.